I know this PowerPoint is going to look a little bit long. Just know there's lots of like pictures and things to try to get your brain to remember things, and I'm going to walk you through it all. So we are starting on our biomes, and this is connecting directly to our ecosystems. To start us off, I do have a quick video for you guys, so please go to the PowerPoint and then click play on that video. So what is a biome? A biome is a large-scale ecosystem. It's animals and plants that have adapted to that specific climate, right? Again, we don't just take a polar bear and drop them in the desert, right? It hasn't adapted to that environment. And so that polar bear is part of that snowy forest tundra kind of environment. These are the primary biomes in the world. We've got our like polar deserts and ice sheets, our tundra, taiga, tropical forests, savannas and deserts and grasslands. I'm going to walk you through the primary ones you need to know for our class in just a little bit. And the climate zone is going to be slightly different. A climate zone is a region in which yearly patterns of temperature, rainfall, and the amount of sunlight are similar. And so with that being said, it's going to be based usually on the equator, with the tops and bottoms being polar climates, working our way closer to the equator, temperature and continental climates, to dry climates, and to our tropical climates. Now, to start, land biomes. So these are only going to be biomes occurring on land. We are going to go over water biomes at the end of the PowerPoint. So, again, Earth's biomes, they're going to be divided by wind patterns, landform, and then closeness of bodies of water. So the different climate zones that you have are affected by this. If you're by the beach, you're going to get a lot more wind. If you have mountains that are blocking the wind, that's going to affect the temperature. If you're like in Michigan or somewhere like that, and you have large bodies of water, even if it's just lakes, that's also going to affect the temperatures. Now, Earth has 6 primary types of biomes. You have your tropical rainforests, your deciduous forests, grasslands, deserts, taigas, and tundras. There are more, but again, these are the ones I want you to know. Now, each type of these biomes occurs in multiple places on Earth. Remember, tundras are going to be super cold, so they're going to be towards the top. We're going to get slightly warmer, still pretty cold. It's going to be that taiga. Then we're going to go into our like temperate or coniferous forests, to our grasslands, then our desert, and then our tropical rainforests usually are going to be more towards like the equator. Now, Earth's biomes, right, they're going to be distributed throughout the world, but they occur in multiple places. For example, North America, South America, Africa, Asia, and Australia all have desert biomes. And the animals that live in those biomes are unique to those biomes because they've adapted to those biomes to better live in them, right? I'm not going to take like a camel and be like, go into the snowy taiga and live, right? It's not going to be able to survive. It doesn't have the traits it needs to stay warm in that kind of environment. Now, only specific organisms can live in certain biomes, right? In here we have different pictures of different species, right? The lizards in North America versus Australia, they can have similar traits, but they're also going to be pretty different from each other, right? The polar bears are going to be different from the grizzly bears. They live in different environments, and so they've adapted to those environments to better survive. All right, now we're going to start going over some of these individual biomes. So first we have our tropical rainforests. These tropical rainforests are going to be found near the equator. Their temperatures are always going to be warm. The climate's very wet, and it usually rains almost every day, so it's creating a very moist and humid environment. That being said, it's going to provide a great growing area for a lot of plants because plants like water and they like that happy, comfortable temperatures to be able to grow. Now, tropical rainforests have about half of all different types of plants on Earth. So most of the variety in plants we see actually comes from our tropical rainforests. Not awesome. That's also one of the big reasons on why we're kind of like want to save our rainforest, because there's so many different types of species. Wiping out certain areas causes species to go entirely extinct. In fact, frogs, it's been approximated that around 1/3 of frogs are already extinct, and in the next 20 years, half of them could go extinct. We'll go over that a little bit more when we get to our climate change lessons. So, in our tropical rainforest, we have 3 layers of produce. We have tall trees, trees that form our canopies. So that's kind of like going to be blocking out the bottom floor, the sunlight reaching down. So tall trees grow really tall. As a result, we're going to have canopies that are going to catch all that other sunlight that drips through. And then vines, orchids, and ferns, these are more climbing plants. And so they're actually going to climb up those trees and canopies, sometimes leaching nutrients from those trees to get the sunlight that they need. It's super cool. If you ever go to some of these tropical rainforests, you'll just see like kind of like where dead leaves and things have kind of gotten caught in some of those branches, and from there you actually have vines and orchids are like growing in those little almost like cups. It's so cool and beautiful to see. All right, tropical rainforest continues. With having so many diverse plants, you're going to have a lot of diverse animals in the tropical rainforest. Now, most of them are going to actually spend their lives in the branches and canopies. That being said, most of our species aren't going to be crawling around on the ground except for like maybe bugs. You're going to have a lot more of like our birds and flying insects, and you're going to have frogs that can jump and monkeys, things that can climb those trees, because if most of our life is in the trees, our predators are going to need to be able to get to trees. So that's why you're going to have species that are going to be better at climbing or getting into those tall, high areas. Animals in this rainforest include things like reptiles, amphibians, mammals, insects, fish, birds. You have a huge variety in the species that live here. They're really fun to look at the pictures of the animals, so I'm going to go through lots of pictures of animals for this lesson. Our next biome is deciduous forests. Now, these forests are kind of known for the autumn colors. That being said, they're going to be the ones that go through the full seasons. Their broad leaves, right, those big old leaves that you see are known as deciduous. So they shed their leaves every year. So when we get those big leaves that then fall every year, deciduous. These biomes are known to have more moderate temperatures and a more moderate amount of rainfall. So they're getting a good, decent amount of rain, but it's not like they're drenched in rain and like high humidity. Okay, so more pictures of our deciduous forest. We don't get as much of this in California. We really don't have as many of the trees changing colors as I would like. If you guys ever have the chance to go to the East Coast during the fall, especially like Virginia area, it is so beautiful. So that being said, every continent except for Africa and Antarctica has deciduous forests, and they're going to have a varying amount of sunlight during the different times of the year. This causes our season changes, right? During that nice spring and summer, we're starting to have a lot more sunlight, so we're going to have more of those leaves growing. However, once we get into the winter and fall, that amount's decreasing, so our leaves are going to die off, so our plants are actually preserving their energy during that time, because they know they can't really survive the best during those times. Deciduous forests let enough sunlight through that like a lot of species are actually going to be living on the ground. We're going to have small trees and shrubs and ferns and moss and all kinds of things growing, and this allows for a lot more of our ground organisms. You're going to have like rabbits and skunks and foxes and chipmunks, deer, coyotes. Yeah, it's really fun. If you guys also ever live in one of these areas, baby foxes, the cutest. When I was living in Pennsylvania, there was like a family of foxes that burrowed right by where we were living, and we'd go on walks and see them. They were so cute and playful. Grasslands. Grasslands, the temperature is going to be more moderate and have more of a light rainfall. They're going to be found on every continent except for Antarctica. So some animals that live in grasslands include things like rabbits and prairie dogs and gophers. So really they're going to be species that usually have to hide. You're also going to have some of your more predator birds, so things like hawks or owls that are going to be hunting them. That being said, Livermore is a grassland. How beautiful grasslands are. Now, grasslands are going to be widely used for agriculture because you don't have as much of that rocky terrain. You get ideal amounts to kind of grow things. A lot of times you have to transport water though. So farmers who do farming and agriculture in these grasslands are known to grow wheat, corn, rice, and then some other grains. The grasslands are kind of known as the bread baskets of the world because they're the things that are producing all the things we need to survive, right? If we hadn't taken advantage of agriculture and really learned how to farm and harvest, we wouldn't have the population size that we have today. Okay, so also grasslands are used for our herds, especially like in Livermore. There's a lot of farmers out here who have cattle and they have sheep and pigs. And so these grasslands are really excellent for this kind of area. All right, our next biome, deserts, not deserts. So deserts are very hot in the summer, but can drop below freezing on winter nights. All organisms then adapt to these extreme temperatures and lack of water. That being said, you'll have things like cacti or Joshua trees, and they're going to store up water in their thick stems and leaves. Okay, they have to be able to store this water because it's very hard to obtain it. Now, Miss Hudson did live in Arizona for a while. That being said, as much as people associate deserts with really hot, it does get extremely cold. However, with that cold weather, we're not getting as much like rainfall and there's some light snow, and our organisms are really like taking that water up and storing them into like the cacti and Joshua trees. If you look those little hole in the cacti right there, there's a lot of animals that actually make their homes inside the cacti. So some species in the deserts include things like birds and snakes and lizards and mice sometimes. So most desert animals will hide during the peak heat, and then they're going to come out at night during that cooler weather because they don't want to bake in the sun. They need to maintain that moisture level. Next biome is our taiga. Now, taiga is a forest of needle-leaved evergreens. Okay, so our needle-leaf trees, so picture like Christmas and happy holidays kind of vibe. Okay, they're going to extend throughout Eurasia and North America. They're going to usually like live quite a bit longer, and they're going to be unique compared to our deciduous trees. Remember, our deciduous trees a lot of times shed their leaves. These taiga trees sometimes these taiga trees do not shed. So, most important adaptation is the needled leaves. So these trees have a waxy covering. It protects them from the cold, and that's the reason why they don't need to shed. So not all the leaves that can be found, I just blanked, I'm so sorry. Not all of them are going to be like producing like crazy all of its fruit during the year. But that being said, these taiga leaves have that unique little spiky part with that waxy leaves to help them maintain themselves all throughout the cold winters and then the warmer months in the summer. Taiga only has 2 layers. It has a solid canopy and then a mossy floor. You'll have insects, mammals, birds, and then like lizards living in these areas. It's going to be very diverse. However, you're also going to have some species that change where they live. So you're going to have those seasonal organisms that live there, right? You have geese that migrate. The same thing applies. Additionally, we have like bears that are going to hibernate because they don't do as well in certain weather changes. So during summer months, some of the organisms that live there are going to vary compared to our winter months, what lives there. Oh my gosh, I just love how cute like the weasels are. They're so cute. Tundras. So a tundra is a rolling plain that spreads across like Greenland, Eurasia, North America. It's going to be a lot colder and we're going to have a lot less plants. This also kind of covers the tip of South America and then small parts of Antarctica. It's going to have very low temperatures, long winters, so it's actually usually not going to have very many trees growing. That being said, it has a very unique trait in that it has a permafrost. A permafrost is a layer of permanently frozen soil just below the surface. So the surface itself, like the ground, is cold. They're going to have very dramatic seasonal changes. The sun is rarely seen in the fall and winter. So if you guys have ever seen like Alaska with those like days where literally the sun's out all day and then the days where like the sun's out for 4 hours, that's what we're talking about. The sun shines all the time during the summer, and its constant light allows for those plants to grow. That being said, our animals a lot of times are going to migrate up there depending on the types. We've got like our geese or certain types of elk and moose that are going to like come up there all of a sudden and then come back down when the weather becomes too extreme, and then the ground is covered and there's no plants to eat. Some species include everything from the walrus, the caribou, muskox, polar bears, lemmings, Arctic fox, gerfalcon, and then like Arctic ground squirrel, and then tundra swans. These birds are super unique. There was a group that would sometimes come to like right near the hospital where I worked in Pennsylvania. There was an empty field, and they would sometimes migrate down there. And when that would happen, it would be weird because it looked like that just this one field snowed overnight because it was just covered in white, and then all of a sudden the white would start moving as like the geese and swans moved. So comparing our biomes are different. They're going to occur in order of that table. Remember how I talked about how we have that like polar going to more of our temperate? This is where this applies, right? They occur in this order because of the amount of energy. Okay, remember, biomes need energy. We get our energy from the sun. That being said, our plants then absorb that energy from the sun and then make it into that form that we then consume and we convert to ATP in our bodies use. So we have our polar climates. Our polar climates are going to be having more of that tundra, then into like our taiga. From there, we're going to go into our coniferous and then to our deciduous forests. We'll work our way down to like our grasslands and then our deserts and then our tropical rainforests. Sorry guys, that's a period bell. Keep recording. So now we have our water ecosystems. Okay, so our waters have different ecosystems because we have fresh water and salt water. So 3 types of water ecosystems. Salt water, that's going to include our oceans and our seas. Fresh water is going to include things like streams and rivers, lakes, ponds, and then brackish water. Brackish water is a mixture of salt water and fresh water. Now, generally, the species that live in these ecosystems don't go between. There's an exception. There was a case that happened with bullheaded sharks that were trapped in a golf course. So what happened is Australia had a huge storm, and as a result, these bullheaded sharks got trapped inside this like lake system inside of an Australian golf course. Now, these lakes were freshwater, and originally we thought these bullheaded sharks could only live in saltwater, but they managed to live in those lakes for 17 years. And then there was like a whole nother storm that hit, and these sharks just kind of disappeared. So we aren't sure if they died or got back into the saltwater ecosystems, but it kind of proves that there are some species that are the exception to the rule. Some species can go between the saltwater and the freshwater ecosystems. So, saltwater ecosystem. So that being said, those intertidal kind of zones, that churning of the waves as it pushes and goes with our tides, right, that's going to change what species get caught in there. That being said, Miss Hudson has seen a ton of species. I've seen starfish and sun starfish. I've seen octopi and jellyfish. Nudibranchs are my personal favorite. Nudibranchs they are not sea slugs. They're a little bit different. Sea slugs are like big old things that kind of not the prettiest looking things. Nudibranchs. Nudibranchs are kind of like sea slugs, but they're really tiny. Like they grow to be like 2 centimeters long. That's tiny. To give you an idea, guys, 2 centimeters, right? 2 centimeters. They're really tiny, but they have beautiful colors. In the corner up there, you can see like that blue, yellow, and pink. Those are all different species of nudibranchs I have found while tide pooling. They're so cute. Now, please note, don't go just touching random sea creatures. There's a form of like a nudibranch that's extremely poisonous. Can kill you if you touch it. There's also a form of an octopi called a blue ring octopus. Don't touch that one. That one will kill you too. So always be careful. You can go and look at all the pretty things, but I would not recommend touching them unless you specialize in that area and become a marine biologist. Okay, so with our saltwater ecosystems, we have our near shore zone. That's going to extend to about 600 feet deep. Rivers a lot of times are going to empty into the ocean and are actually going to really provide a lot of nutrients for our organisms to survive. The water here is usually going to be more calm, and you're going to find a lot of schools of fish living in these areas. Now, our open ocean zone, that's going to include most of our ocean water. The water is going to be very deep, but most of the organisms are going to live near the surface because that's where we're having sunlight come through. So that's where we're able to catch food. That being said, that's where you'll find your plankton or phytoplankton. If you guys watch SpongeBob, plankton here, okay? It makes up the beginning of our open ocean, and then you have tiny herbivores who kind of graze on our plankton and zooplankton. Additionally, you're going to have larger organisms, right? They're going to be migrating between these different areas, and sometimes they're feeding on these too, or feeding on the larger organisms that feed on these. All right, so for our freshwater ecosystems, organisms in these ecosystems only adapt to this fresh water. Some of the plants include things like duckweed, cattails, a lot of different types of grasses. You've got lots of different types of fish, right? You've got trout, bass, catfish, frogs, lots of different types of species, turtles, crawfish. The water temperatures and speed really determine what kinds of organisms live in that freshwater ecosystem. A lot of times, if the water is moving too fast, you're not going to have as many fish or like insects in there. For example, like mosquitoes, they like still water. Dragonflies, they need to lay eggs on kind of like more that still grass. Now, some of those freshwater organisms are going to be your bottom feeders, so things like crayfish, crawdads, and then like our catfish. They're going to be really picking up all those like things that kind of drop to the bottom. Now, we do have estuaries, and this really leads us into our next ecosystem with brackish waters. Brackish water is going to be a mixture of both saltwater and freshwater. This type of water is usually found in estuaries, which connect, right, that leaking down freshwater into like our oceans and such. So an estuary is connecting our rivers to our oceans. These estuaries are often known as like brackish water. Okay, so our brackish water is a mix of fresh and salt. Estuaries are going to be the most productive ecosystems on Earth because there's a huge amount of nutrients and organic matter. Remember, we're getting all that stuff kind of compiled that's almost like waste products. And that being said, it's going to be where all kinds of stuff is going to be filtered, and kind of like what we think is nasty stuff is excellent food. There's going to be two types. There's going to be salt marshes and then swamps. So this being said, estuaries make an ideal habitat for many organisms. In fact, 2/3 of all fish and shellfish rely on estuaries on our east coast United States for survival. Okay, some examples of things are like oysters, mussels, shrimp. A lot of delicious things that we like to eat rely on these estuaries. That's why when there was like that huge oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, aka right at Texas, it caused such huge damage to the entire ecosystem because you didn't have the food that we rely on, and then like the organisms themselves, the food that they eat, that it died off. It really almost caused an entire collapse of an ecosystem. So that's why taking care of estuaries and not having all these toxins leaking into our water that then goes to these areas is super important. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to climate change, but please, please, please take care of our ecosystems. Also, watch what you're eating because sometimes there are spills that make the foods that you eat more toxic, like shrimp. All right, take care, guys. I know it was a longer lesson. Bye.